Hello everyone, today I am taking a look at Bioshock Infinite. Wow, this game is a absolute blast. I really enjoy it, and frankly enjoy it a lot more than the original Bioshock. The original Bioshock had a pretty interesting story, concept, characters, I guess, but Bioshock Infinite does all that and more. So another isolated society now is not under the ocean, but in the air, very similar to the story of Gilligan's Island, this floating city in the sky, and these people. Essentially, there was some scientific breakthrough discovery, some special particle, in the early 1900s that allowed, just science to happen, and suddenly things could float without any, heavy means at all. And so what I really like about this game is that, while the first game was really based around the 1920s, this is based around the 1910s, and the city that you are in is kind of turn of the century and has that kind of American kind of colonial optimism that is ingrained into their culture. And so when you start the game, there's kind of this conflict between, Comstock, who is the leader of the city, and Fitzroy, who was this young rebel saying that they're exploiting the people and we have to rise up. And so it's kind of trouble in paradise, and you are dragged into the midst of it. Now, again, this whole story has a lot more depth to it, and it feels very similar, at least in some way, to the ending of the first game, where essentially you have all these daughters who essentially you take care of. And in this scenario, again, you have your daughter that's kind of been taken by the mafia or something because you have to pay a debt. And so you meet, your two contacts by this lighthouse, similar to the first game. However, in this scenario, what happens is you're faced with a very childish, frankly, puzzle at the beginning of the game. We have to ring a bell, and basically you have to go on this one mission for these people, basically in order to get your daughter back, and who is basically just an infant at this point. And so the story kind of goes from there, and so you input this code into this lighthouse, and it actually turns into this like little rocket ship or a jetpack thing, and it launches you up into the sky, and it brings you to this new city. And Bioshock Infinite basically begins. Mechanically, there's a lot of new upgrades and changes. The guns obviously feel a lot better, a lot more diverse. You get everything from submachine guns to snipers, shotguns, etc., the whole deal, as well as some fantasy weapons. And again, this is kind of like, a steampunk style game, I guess I can say that. And again, the propaganda is, just very over the top and exaggerated and very pompous and full of itself, and it's just very funny to see it. There are also some new powers in this game. There's the power to like control bees and stuff. There's one where you control a murder of crows that goes after people, and a whole series of other kind of silly things, children's carnival games, and silly whatsits and fizzits and all these other interesting things. And so the whole city is kind of this built around this sort of imperialistic and colonial identity. And it's kind of more of a theocracy. That's because Bioshock has always been about politics and political structures. And so it kind of doesn't really get too much into that at this point. It's really based around the world and the characters and just the established authority. And so Comstock is kind of like half scientist, half preacher. And so he's kind of seen as this philosopher king, essentially, who is there to become the tyrant and the ruler of the land, and basically show everyone, the right religious way to worship. And so it's kind of funny because there's not a lot of talk about religion and God. It's kind of like Comstock himself is kind of the god of this world, and so you kind of see the problem with the extremities of that on both sides of it, actually, which I appreciate. So even after you join the rebels, you start to disagree with some of the rebels' actions. They kind of go too extreme and too far, and the revenge that they take out on the people of their supposed oppressive paradise is too much, even for the main character to stomach. And so you begin actually doubting, like the politics really fall to the wayside, and really, falls to, the relationship between him and his daughter, and of course Elizabeth. And so Elizabeth is the main, I almost said the main character of this game, but she really is an amazing character. She is so full of life and witty and spunky and funny and everything that you would want from a female MC. And so she essentially has been locked, in the tower or in this city, and she's never actually even been into the city. And so she kind of is exploring everything. And so that's great for the player's perspective, because as you are experiencing everything for the first time, she's also experiencing everything for the first time. So a lot of things she understands or doesn't understand, and she's able to kind of, and join you in your shock and revelation of how this world is, even though she's grown up in it. And in combat, she's also super useful. She essentially has a special power called the Tear, where she can essentially turn or tear open holes in space-time. And so if you need a gun or a weapon, or if you need support or some kind of special thing like a turret to materialize, she can do that. You just have to tell her what you need. And so even in combat, she also has a huge support role. But really, it's her characterization that really kind of shines through, and how she, has these different... I think there's different outcomes. For example, there's this one part where you have to choose what kind of brooch you're going to put, or what kind of choker she's going to put on her neck. And one is a free flying bird, or the other one is a bird cage. And so you have to decide what kind of aspects of her personality you're going to emphasize. That's not really part of the gameplay, but thematically, that's kind of part of the story. And of course, the other thing about her is that she's constantly being chased by this giant mechanical bird, which has been created to essentially, keep her locked up, essentially. And not a huge spoiler, but of course, it turns out she's related to Comstock in some way. And so, of course, Comstock wants to, keep her under control and keep her safe. And of course, so another really great thing about the gameplay is the skyhook. I think this is what's shown a lot of E3 trailers, and maybe this was the beginning of the whole grappling hook trend in games we saw in around 2015 or something. It's like everything had a grappling hook, and it felt really, really good in this game. So the skyhook, as they call it, is basically this tri-angled wheel that will essentially allow you to grab onto things, jump around the environment. It gives you a huge amount of movability as Booker. And the best part of the skyhook is there are certain sections where they have these sky rails, and you basically ride the rails through the sky while shooting with your other hand. It is a ton of fun. It is a huge gameplay mechanic that's super, super cool, and I think very iconic of this game in particular. Honestly, this game, it came out in, I want to say 2012, so that's almost 7 or 6 years after the first Bioshock, so that's typically twice as long. They did a Bioshock 2 in between that, but no one really talks about that game. I don't know, it doesn't look very good. It looked kind of redundant and whatever. But this was the game that was... It almost doesn't feel like the old Bioshock. It feels so different and so much better in so many ways that they feel like two different games. Anyway, as you go throughout the story, not only do you discover more of the history of, the corrupt individuals within the city, the innocent individuals, what the rebels are fighting for, how the city even came into being, the particles that keep it afloat, the science that keeps it functioning, and also the conspiracy as to who exactly your daughter is, who Comstock is, the background of everyone, because everyone's hiding something even though they don't realize it, and also the origin of Elizabeth's mysterious powers. And there's a really great story to just really uncover in this game, and it's told very smartly. And of course, the best thing about the game and the world is that as you progress, you also deepen your relationship with Elizabeth, and she becomes a very likable character. Probably one of my favorite female characters in gaming, frankly. She's smart, funny, witty, resourceful. She's everything you basically need for an adventure like this. And she's never annoying or aggravating or is a decoy quest or, she's never a target, essentially. You never have to worry about her like someone like Ashley from Resident Evil 4, for example. And yeah, Bioshock Infinite is just a very iconic, fun experience. Probably my favorite weapon in this game is definitely the hand cannon. It's just this massive, oversized revolver that just blasts enemies. It's just absolutely ridiculous and just a lot of fun to use. And yeah, speaking on the story, I guess I'm definitely not going to give out spoilers or whatever. But the ending of the game is really out there. Like, I thought there was going to be a twist, but there is a twist so twisty that it really hurt my brain. Essentially, that deals with time loops and multiple dimensions and all that really far out stuff that I don't really expect from a lot of Western games. Usually it's kind of like almost an anime kind of trope, but what they went with the ending was really interesting and really powerful and cool, even though it wasn't super explained, which it does kind of get in the DLC. And I'll get to that in a sec. Another thing I love about this game is also the aesthetic of the city, the fact that they tend to sing Amazing Grace as the main kind of theme for the game unofficially. A lot of like early church services and church choirs, and just the vibe of that whole kind of era of the early 1900s was very much kind of alive and present in this moment. And yeah, so the DLC, which was Burial at Sea, and the other one, which I honestly forget, which has added more stuff to the main game of Bioshock. But Burial at Sea is, I cannot stress enough how important Burial at Sea is. Not only from a content perspective, like it's like the Elizabeth DLC. I mean, it's kind of more or less Elizabeth's game anyway, but the way she is created as a character, the way she develops in Burial at Sea is so fascinating. There's a little crossover with Paris, because throughout the campaign she always says she wanted to go to Paris, and she finally does, and she gets to. And the whole energy is just so vibrant. And what's really important about this DLC, and this rarely happens, is that from a story and lore perspective, it bridges the gap between Infinite and the first Bioshock. So it's like incredibly important to the story because it merges these two universes together and kind of connects them, which is something you expect a sequel to do, but it really doesn't explain itself very clearly in this base game. And they only really get to it in the DLC, which is like the sequel to the sequel, technically, in a weird way. But yeah, you still have your cast of kind of over the top wild characters, you know, psychopath villains and all this other stuff. Crazy cast of also different, you know, powers and stuff like that, but it feels so much better than the original Bioshock. Maybe because the original setting, you know, you're no longer stuck underwater. You have these beautiful cityscapes and skies to look at, and it's just the whole feeling of freedom. It feels like you've opened up, and it feels like a very different game, and feels just in general a lot better and just very well made overall. This is a game that's inspired a lot of people. It's kind of become the iconic look for Bioshock, and as far as I know, I don't think they made anything after this. I mean, I know there's this new game being teased called Judas, which is essentially like, you know, this scenario but in space, so they're kind of going back to their roots of System Shock. I'm not actually sure if this is the same studio that's doing it. I thought it was, but I could be wrong on that. But yeah, this is kind of like where Bioshock kind of ended in around like 2012, and they never really made another thing, or I'm not super sure, but there's definitely not another Bioshock game in the series. And I guess that's kind of good and kind of bad, because it ended off on such a strong note. But again, it's like, where do they go from here? Anyway, guys, I'm not sure if there's anything else to say about this game. It's really great. It's a ton of fun. A very interesting mixture of sci-fi and, you know, politics and dystopia. And oh yeah, I almost forgot, the last section of this game is very not like anything else in the game itself. It's very different. You have this kind of sneaking stealth horror section as you're uncovering the truth, and it's just very weird in general. But yeah, this is an absolute classic. I love it to death, and it's definitely something that everyone should play. It's the best Bioshock. Anyway, guys, I think that's it. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.